All right, so now we've created our basic HTML structure, and we're going to add a little bit of color or design to it. It's not going to be anything fancy, but at least we're going to get started and walk down that path. I'm going to erase this paragraph just for make things a little cleaner. And then I think that's pretty good. Maybe I'll spell item with a capital. Anyway, so now we're going to do some styling, which is where CSS comes into play. So HTML is strictly for styling, for structure, and then we use CSS to create the styling. And let's just jump into that. All right, so I'm going to look at my project and I'm going to create a new page. And generally our style sheet is called style or styles.css. And this is where just CSS goes. I cannot put anything in here that is HTML tag like. So that looks like an HTML tag, and you can see all of the red nastiness already coming across. So just for visual, I'm going to put these side by side and hide our pane there so we don't see it. And we'll have these two side by side, and we want to link to that style sheet. In other words, we need to tell the browser to that's rendering our index page to go look in our style sheet for appropriate stylings or for the style definition. And so to do that, I'm just going to use the shortcut link and tab, and it's going to fill in relationship equals style sheet, REL for short. That is necessary part of this tag. And I'm also going to put the name of that style sheet, which I called styles.css. Not XS, there we go. All right. Recognize also that the style sheet link is going inside the head tag. So again, to reiterate, everything in the head tag is strictly for the browser informational pieces. It's things that the browser needs to know in order to render the page correctly. It does not go in the body tag, and the body tag is where we put things that we want our users to see. So in our head tag is our style sheet, and now we're going to apply some styles. And the way that you do styles is the first thing you're going to do is put what's called a selector. I'll write that word out so you can see it, selector. And a selector is the HTML element that we want to apply a styling to. In other words, I'm going to apply a style to the body. I'm going to make the whole body background color a certain color. And so we choose the selector, and then we follow that up with an open and close curly brace. I like to put them on different lines because I can put multiple styles on top of each other, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. So I'm going to erase that. I think it's easier to read, but that's up to you. But anyway, everything that is going to be applied to the body, all styling that's going to be applied to the body is in between this open and close curly brace. And in this case, I'm going to make the background color. I already have some little pop-ups here to help me on attributes, these are called, or properties that are available that I can utilize with my body tag. Background color seems like one, and I'm already getting some color ideas. Oh, let's try aqua. So we'll do that. I'm going to hit save and refresh my page, and if everything worked well, now I should have a body, which is my selector, with the background color. If I had given it something else, like let's do color white. I'll just display this so you can see what it is. I'm going to erase it, obviously, because that's hard to read. But color then is the text color. So for everything in the body, every child of the body is going to be, the text is going to be white. And what I was trying to go with a little earlier is this idea that, let me spread this out so you can see it. It's easier to read these properties on top of each other as opposed to if I made them all on one line. And that's why I was saying I put the open and close curly brace on separate lines. Where this is not incorrect, it would just be difficult to read, especially if you applied more and more styles to it. So not incorrect, designer's choice. I don't feel like that's easier to read, so I will put all of mine in this fashion because I think it's easier. Okay. So now we have a kind of a default of, if you will, I'm going to get rid of this color. We don't need color on everything. That looks awful. All right, so we have a default background color is where we went on the body. All right, so let's change just the H2 property. So something on the H2. We can do H2, and then in the H2, maybe we'll try color. Let's see what gray does. So I'm going to save that and see what happens. All right, so it's changing the color. So recognize then that I have a selector that's saying specifically color the H2. Now, just kind of an FYI, if I had left color up here, and so the suggestion here is that all text is going to be white, but then I say H2 is going to be gray. Well, that's a conflict of interest there. So the browser has to decide, well, is the text going to be white or is it going to be gray? And so what will happen, let's just see if you guessed right. So all the text became white of the body with the exception of H2. H2 is more specific than a broader body. So anything that has the broad default for color, anything that's not inside the H2 tag would be colored white. But if there's a conflict, whatever is more specific, and H2 is more specific than a body tag because body is higher up the generic chain, so to speak, would receive the color. Again, I don't want a white color. I think that's hard to read, so I'm going to take that out, but I used it as a demonstration. All right, so I got more specific, and I said the H2 tag is going to receive a specific color. All right, let's play with the UL tag. So the UL tag is this entire element. So it's going to apply to not the LIs specifically, but the UL tag. Meaning, let's do something like border 1 pixel gray and double. All right. So what I've done now is applied a border around the UL element. So the border didn't go around each individual LI. If I had made this an LI, the border would have gone around just the LIs. But that's not what I did. I asked it to go around the UL, so we're applying a styling to the parent of the LIs. Let's see, what else do I want to do with the UL? I want to also remind you that there is a thing called W3 schools, and you can be looking up anything you're not sure of, like how are you coming up with all of these colors, and how am I supposed to know these things? Am I just supposed to memorize it? No. There is a nice little tool here, this little magnifying glass, and you can, like I'm going to type in shadow because I'd like to put a little shadow around my UL. So you can look things up. Now recognize that there is ads, so don't click on the ads. That's not what we're wanting. But if you click on something like CSS box shadow property, that is in W3 schools. It's a CSS reference, so that seems like something I might be interested in. And so this gives you some ideas of things you can do with properties. So if you don't know, like UL, you can type in UL, and it'll give you examples of what it is that, so here's examples. You can also click on try it yourself, and it gives you a nice little visual so you can see what the different values are doing or how it's supposed to look or how it's going to look. And then there's oftentimes further on down, it'll give you different properties that you can utilize for that particular, different values that you can use for that property. So, or attribute. Boy, there's a lot of words and I'm getting myself all confused. Hopefully I'm not getting you confused. The bottom line is, if you look in box shadow, I'm going to go back up to where the example was because that seems easiest. So box shadow, if you read down below in all the fine print or all of the definitions below, you'll see that sometimes when we have a property, we can assign more than one value, separated most of the time by spaces. And if you read further down, what it'll tell you is this first property is, or this first value, this is our property, this is a value, this is our horizontal distance, this is our shadow vertically, so how far across, how far down, and what color. So I'm just going to copy this in, and we'll do that with our box shadow and see what we get. Okay, so we're getting a box shadow. I believe one of these is also, like if I do the next one, if I do like 5px, let me just test my memory banks here. Yeah, so that's a blur setting. So see how it kind of blurs around? So we can change the blur setting. So if you add another property, let's do 15 and just see it, then we should see more of a blur. So again, I'm not making these things up. The best thing to do is, or I'm just not super smart, I'd like to say I am, but what you would do is go into your properties and then, or your W3 schools, and look down below. There's blur right there. So you can hit play it and you can see examples of all of these things, and it gives you a good overview of things that you can do and a description of how to do it. So that's your documentation reference. All right, so don't forget about W3 schools as a reference. All right, so I've got a nice box shadow around it. Another thing I would like to do is padding, and padding is the distance between my content and that border. See how this is all smushed together? So I would like a little bit of space between my border and the item 1 or item 2 down here. So that's where padding comes into play. So I'm going to do a padding, and I'm just going to do 25 pixels. And that should show padding all the way around. So now I've got padding from the top and the bottom. It also, well, let's share this with you. If I go to inspect element and I spread this out a little bit, you should see I'm going to click on my UL here. I'm going to click on my UL, and you'll see that my padding has been applied. So this is a nice tool to help you see visually what you might not be able to see on the browser. In other words, it's hard to see that 25 pixels was applied, but if I click on this UL and I look here in this box model, I can see there's 25 pixels. I can see 25 on the left here, 25 on the bottom, and then it looks like there's a default margin of 16 that was set by the browser for me. So you can see if I move my mouse, it's going to disappear. But if you look up here in the browser, you're going to see it's highlighted, showing the 16 top and bottom margin. So this is a good place to come if you're not sure why things are being displayed on the browser the way they're being displayed as far as spacing is concerned. And so I can also play with this. I could type in 30 just to see what that would look like. And you can see the blue is changing, so it gives me a good indication of what is being applied and how it looks. So this is a good tool. And it also gives you a visual of the difference between padding and margin. So padding is the difference between the content and the border, and then margin is the difference between the border and the element above it. So if you look right now at the highlighting in the browser, the yellow portion, you can see that's 16 pixels in yellow. So it's pushing itself 16 pixels away from the H2 element. Let's make that 0 so we can see that. And that should have pushed it up. So now we can see that we don't have a margin. There's still a lot of spacing between the UL and the H2. And I would imagine if I click on H2, you can see that H2 has 19 pixels. So that's causing that huge spacing between the UL and the H2. So just for a visual, let's make that 0, and you can see that that's smushing that stuff up together. So this is a good playground, a good sandbox to experiment with different values so you can see what they mean. Recognize that changing it here isn't changing it. I'm going to close this out. Isn't changing it here in my actual page. It's just a good place to play around with things so I can see what's happening. Okay, so refresh that back to the style sheet. Perfect. All right, so let's also acknowledge do one other setting, again, just to refresh us on a bunch of the different properties that are available. This table is taking up the full width of this browser window. We'll start to call that viewport. And what I'm going to do instead is change this to, I'm going to change the width of the UL element to maybe 50%. So take up 50% of the space that's provided in the viewport. And so it should shrink up to half the size of the width of that viewport. And I'm going to use viewport as a terminology rather than browser window width or something along those lines. So we'll start to use viewport. Let's just do one other thing in our refresher of style sheets, or a quick review of style sheets and styles. Now I'm going to do a style to each individual LI. So each individual LI seems awful squished together. I could use padding to push them apart. Padding, let's do 10 pixels, and let's see how that does. That works. You can also do something called line height, which also comes into play with paragraphs. And I'll choose a line height, which is just like a line height setting in Word. You know, how do I want it? 1.5, my spacing 1.5 lines. So we could do something like 1.5, and let's see what happens. So similar setting in this case, but it can apply to two different scenarios. One could be padding, so how much padding is going to be pushed between each LI, and line height would come in handy with a paragraph. So if we had a paragraph with lots of lines, I'm sure that's pretty obvious, but I'm going to make a paragraph. I'm going to use a shortcut lorem, which is going to make me some lorem ipsum text. And now if I add a line height to, before I do that, let's just look at the paragraph. We can see that those lines are pretty close together. If I do a line height and try it that way, now I've got 1.5 spacing, so that's line height. So the intention in this video was to give you a quick overview on style sheets, linking to style sheets, remembering that styles is how we design, how we put colors and decoration and design to our structure of our web page, and the index, the HTML, provides us just with structure. Remember that we can look at, and I forgot to mention this too, let's do one other thing. We also have a CSS validator, which is equally as important as the HTML validator. And it looks very similar, but notice that it says CSS on the top instead of HTML. Again, I can take all of this code and put it in here and validate it. Let me pull it out further. And I've got an all clear to go. It doesn't have its nice little editor in here like the last one did. Where might I run into problems? Well, you might leave off a semicolon in between your properties. Now, if I did that, I would get an error. So that's important. Maybe I have an extra, I forgot to close my paragraph tag, so that's going to generate an error. So these are things that you need to be aware of. Again, you should not have, even if it seems to be working, just because it is working doesn't make it okay, or it might not be working. Things might not be doing what you thought it should be doing. So this is a good place to come in, check your work, and looks like I didn't do something right. Missing my semicolon. Apparently I didn't put my semicolon back in. So thank you for catching that. And there you go. So always validate your HTML and your CSS. And we have provided a great starter to overview of style sheets.